the founding of Kel'Thalas, 6,800 years before the Dark Portal. Far from the dense woodlands of Ashenvale, Dath'Remar, Sunstrider, and the Highborn continued their quest to find a home in the Eastern Kingdoms. They followed the trails of magical essence, seeking the confluence of ley lines that their scouts had spied in the north. The Highborn's journey proved unexpectedly brutal. A ferocious blizzard stopped the elves dead in their tracks for nearly a month as they traveled. With no way to move forward or escape from the mountain pass, the Highborn quickly realized just how vulnerable they had become without the Well of Eternity. For the first time in memory, they began to die of starvation. Only the compassion of some primitive humans living in the mountains kept the entire expedition from perishing in the winter's fury. Once the storm lifted, the Highborn forged ahead, shaken but determined to find a new home. As they drew closer to the land that the scouts had found, hope warmed their weary hearts. Verdant woodlands blanketed their terrain, and the ground beneath the Highborn's feet crackled with potent lines of magic. But the elves soon discovered that another race also called this region home: the barbaric Amani trolls. The arrival of the Highborn infuriated the trolls, who had harbored a bitter hatred of elves from the days of Queen Ajara. The Amani sent out raiding parties immediately, and the Highborn soon learned to fear troll ambushes in the dense forests. Yet, the elves stubbornly pressed forward, using their magical prowess to decimate any Amani who dared cross their path. Soon, the trolls also learned to tread cautiously. The continuous skirmishes fostered a mutual enmity between the Amani and the Highborn. Despite the trolls' ferocity, the elves finally reached the nexus of ley lines they had been seeking. Powerful torrents of arcane energy converged in the vibrant forests. Dath'Remar proclaimed that this was where they would begin their civilization anew. Before the eyes of his followers, Dath'Remar revealed something he had kept hidden over the long and tortuous journey in the north: a vial filled with the enchanted waters from the original Well of Eternity. Just before the Highborn had been exiled from Mount Hyjal, Dath'Remar had secretly taken one of Illidan Stormrage's remaining vials from the custody of the Night Elves. Dath'Remar poured the vial into a small lake at the center of the Nexus, and a brilliant fount of energy tore through the skies of Azeroth. The Highborn dubbed this glorious cradle of power the Sunwell, a name chosen in honor of Dath'Remar and his bold quest to reignite their culture. Thereafter, the Highborn abandoned their traditional worship of the moon, instead taking their strength from the sun. In time, they would even be known by a new name: High Elves. The amount of arcane power available to the elves increased by an astonishing degree. Many of them proclaimed that Dath'Remar had brought them salvation. They called their new land Kel'Thalas, or High Home, and declared that it would dwarf the Night Elf civilization and stand as a monument for the ages. The trolls did not agree. The High Elves had built their new kingdom atop ancient Amani ruins still considered hallowed ground by the trolls. Outnumbering the elves by more than 10 to 1, the Amani struggled ferociously to drive the invaders from their sacred land. The High Elves drew on the full might of their newfound power, barely holding off the trolls' assaults. Dath'Remar himself led almost every battle against the fierce Amani. Bit by bit, the elves carved out the borders of their kingdom, securing a new home, paid for in blood of their brothers and sisters. Yet, many of the High Elves grew wary of their rampant use of arcane magic, fearing that it would draw the Burning Legion to Azeroth once again. Dath'Remar sent his most powerful arcanists to find a solution. Over several decades, they built a series of monolithic runestones around Kel'Thalas' borders. This barrier was called Ban Dinorel, or the Gatekeeper in the High Elven tongue. It would prevent others from detecting the elves' usage of arcane magic, and it would also frighten away superstitious Amani. The trolls eventually retreated back to their temple of Zulaman. They decided it was safer to ambush elven convoys that strayed beyond the magic barrier than to launch a full-scale assault on Kel'Thalas. An elite group of High Elf Rangers soon arose to combat this threat. Inside the borders of Kel'Thalas, civilization thrived. No longer fearful of using magic, the High Elves created marvelous works and bathed their land in eternal springtime. Never again would they experience another winter as brutal as the one they had suffered en route to this land. Their capital, Silvermoon City, became a shining monument to the memory of the elves' ancient empire. With the new empire established, Darthromar stepped down as leader. His bloodline would go on to inherit a kingdom of peace and prosperity. Yet, this era would come to an end when Darthromar's great-grandson, Anistarion, donned the mantle of leadership. He would come to power at a time of his people faced war with the trolls once again. The Curse of Crystal Song, 6,000 years before the Dark Portal. As Kel'Thalas flourished, the highborn communities across the world struggled to survive. One such community dwelled in the city of Shandaral, a repository of arcane relics and artifacts. At the apex of the Night Elves' empire, this outpost had been established in the northern reaches of Kalimdor. Following the Sundering, Azeroth's main continent had fractured into multiple landmasses. Now, Shandaral and its highborn dwelled in the frigid heart of a new harsh continent known as Northrend. The Shandaral highborn remained in total isolation, cut off from their cousins in Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. Their distance from the second Well of Eternity left them vulnerable to disease and other ailments. Yet, unlike Darthromar's followers, the Shandaral highborn did not possess any vials of the Well of Eternity's waters. They had no way to create a surrogate source of power. For centuries, these highborn scoured the surrounding forests of Moonsong for a means to sustain themselves. During this time, the highborn witnessed members of the Blue Dragonflight using spells to crystallize living things and draw power from them. Although the dragons performed these acts out of mere curiosity, the elves saw the techniques as a means to an end to their suffering forever. Attempts by the highborn to interact with the dragons were ignored, or, in some cases, met with open hostility. Out of desperation, a group of highborn sorceresses infiltrated the Blue Dragonflight Wanderer's lair, the Nexus. The highborn succeeded in learning the dragon's techniques, but greed also drove them to take more than they had come for. The elves pilfered some of the powerful relics stored in the Nexus. In doing so, they triggered magical wards, sending the blue dragons into a frenzy. Although the highborn thieves escaped with their lives, they knew full well that the dragons would seek retribution. That day soon arrived. Dozens of blue dragons descended on Shandaral, seething with indignation at the theft of their precious relics by the lesser highborn. The elven sorceresses, desperate to drive away their enemies, gathered on an icy cliff overlooking Moonsong. There, they agreed to use the techniques they had acquired from the Nexus. As one, the highborn sorceresses focused their power, hoping to crystallize a small portion of the forest and use its energies as a weapon to annihilate the dragons. The spell proved disastrous. The highborn's reckless casting set off a blinding explosion visible from as far away as Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms. The roaring torrent of energy instantly crystallized the entire forest of Moonsong. The blue dragons, sensing the impeding spellwork, escaped before disaster struck. The physical forms of every other living creature in the region were shattered by the release of energy. Their spirits, although warped by the powerful spell, were left intact, cursed to mindlessly wander the haunted land that would become known as the Crystal Song Forest. The felling of Andrasil, 4,500 years before the Dark Portal. When the Sundering tore through Azeroth, the tectonic devastation rattled the captive old gods and weakened their keeper Wrath prisons. The apocalyptic event also stirred the malign entities into new degrees of deadly awareness. Over the millennia that followed, great tendrils of corruption spilled from the old gods' damaged prisons and gradually seeped to the world's surface. Northrend, where Yogg-Saron was imprisoned, saw some of the most severe effects. festering blooms of a strange new mineral, serenite, spread throughout the crust of the land and sapped the life of native flora and fauna. Upon discovering serenite, a small group of druids from the Cenarian Circle decided to eradicate it. They reasoned that the life-giving energies of the World Tree could heal the lands around Mount Hygial. Another great tree could do the same in Northrend. The group's leader, Fanderal Stagehelm, soon became obsessed with the idea. Some druids advised him to seek the guidance of the dragon aspects. Their knowledge and blessings had allowed Nordrassil to flourish. Without them, planting another great tree could have unforeseen consequences. Yet, Staghound believed there was no time to wait. Serenite was spreading unchecked throughout Northrend and even in the other parts of the world. Rather than waste time in endless debates, Staghound moved to act, without consulting the aspects of the rest of the Cenarian Circle. Fandral and his closest followers secretly cut 6 enchanted branches from the bots of Nordrassil. With the branches in hand, they traveled the world to locations where serenite blooms had sprung to life. One by one, the druids planted the branches in these regions, hoping to thwart the corruption. The areas where Fandral and his allies left marked included Ashenvale, Crystal Song Forest, Feralas, and 2 remote regions in the Eastern Kingdom that would later be known as the Duskwood and the Hinterlands. The branches quickly took root and became new trees. Together, they acted like conduits, channeling the powers of their Emerald Dream into the waking world, strengthening the nearby wildlife and scouring the serenite deposits. Heartened by their success, the druids planted the last and greatest of the branches in the mountains of Northrend over the largest growth of serenite. This new world tree, named Andrasil, or Crown of the Snow, grew with astonishing speed, and the benefits were almost immediate. The spread of serenite ceased, and wildlife flourished anew. Malfurion and the rest of the Cenarian Circle became furious upon learning that these branches had been planted without their approval. They did, however, agree that the plan seemed to have worked. For several decades, Andrasil towered over Northrend, and all seemed well. Yet in time, circumstances changed. Bloody battles erupted between the Tonka and the forest nymphs of Northrend, 2 races not known for their warring ways. The fighting was sudden and shockingly vicious, filled with barbarism and unspeakably vile acts. Word slowly reached the druids, and the Cenarian Circle launched an expedition to investigate the source of the violence. What the druids found chilled them to their marrow. Andrasil's root had reached so deep into the earth that they had touched Yogg-Saron's subterranean prison. The old god had infused the tree with its foul energies, and thus all living creatures in the area were slowly being driven to madness. The Cenarian Circle knew that, without the blessing of the aspects, Andrasil was vulnerable to corruption. They were also aware that there were no way to spare the World Tree or ease its suffering. The Cenarian Circle sorrowfully decided that the only recourse was to destroy Andrasil. With heavy hearts, they felled the great tree. It slammed down into the icy surface of Northrend with a deafening boom that echoed even through the ethereal forests of the Emerald Dream. Forever after, the druids were referred to the fallen world tree as Vordrasil, or Broken Crown. Although killing Andrasil had been a heartbreaking task, the Cenarian Circle was pleased it had stopped the growth of serenite. Yet, unbeknownst to the druids, some of the dark had taken root in the Emerald Dream. Yogg-Saron had used the trees planted by Fandral as a doorway into the dream, a doorway through which an old gods could grasp the ethereal domain as well. Small seeds of corruption were spread throughout Ysera's realm. In time, these seeds polluted the dreamways. This marked the beginning of what would become known as the Emerald Nightmare.